As I mentioned in a previous video, Never Knows Best is one of my favorite video game channels on YouTube. If you are into deep analysis and timeless franchises like Baldur's Gate, Fallout, or Elder Scrolls, then go check him out. But Alex, why the hell are you mentioning some other YouTube channel in a video that's meant to be about Storm of Zehir? Well, my impatient yet totally on point hypothetical friend, because Never Knows Best, had this to say.
When it comes to bad games, I often feel a bit sympathetic to those titles that try their best and still fail, because they often have good ideas, and for all their faults, there's signs that a good game is in there somewhere. And maybe if things were different and money and time were more plentiful, well, maybe that bad game could have been something great.
And you know what?
I concur.
Welcome to Ye Olde Entertainment. My name is Alex, and as you know, it is my duty, my mission, my purpose in life to help you decide whether that game that you have been thumping for so long is indeed the right game for you or not. And today, as we near the end of our road to Baldur's Gate 3, we take on Storm of Zehir, the second expansion to Neverwinter Nights 2. If you want to know about the other goodie stuff that we have reviewed as part of this journey, you might as well check out our playlist titled Our Road to Baldur's Gate 3. And while you're at it, well, you should know that hitting that big bright red subscribe button will not kill you. Some consider Neverwinter Nights 2 to be a subpar title compared to other D&D heavyweights that came out in the early and mid-2000s, particularly those made with the Infinity engine. Mask of the Betrayer, although it is an expansion to this less than stellar game, is generally regarded as one of the best D&D games ever. Some would say it's even the best. But where does Storm of Zehir stand? I would say that, for better and worse, it stands in a league of its own. I'll tell you my story with it. So I finished Mask of the Betrayer, and I couldn't believe how good it was.
It's so good. So good.
So good. So I said, more! And I immediately dove headfirst into Storm of Zehir. And to be honest, I was very impressed with my first couple of hours in this expansion. You start your adventure aboard a ship, and that's a big plus for me. I don't know what it is about adventures that start on ships. Maybe it's the implication that there's nowhere to run, that uncertainty and adventure await. I don't know why, but I freaking love it. Actually, I'm kind of curious if it's just me. Did you guys play Divinity Original Sin 2, Pillars of Eternity 2, the first God of War maybe? Did the fact that they start on a ship add anything to your enjoyment? I admit that Storm of Zehir scored a couple of other early victories with me.
As an author, one must learn to see setbacks as advantages of a different variety.
One of the first characters that you meet is Volothamp Gedarm, the famous chronicler of Faerun. And though he makes an appearance in several other books and games like Baldur's Gate and Throne of Bhaal, he's a lot more important in Storm of Zehir.
Indeed, friend dwarf.
He has exploration quests to give you, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and he writes down the tale of your adventures, which, spoilers, is presented to you at the end of the game as an epilogue to your adventure. There's even a funny dialogue option about giving you credit as a co-author. One of my very favorite things in Storm of Zehir has to do with Volo's recounting of my adventures. Massive spoilers ahead, you have been warned. As Volo puts pen to paper one last time to narrate the tales of our exploits, we're actually given editorial input.
No way!
That's right, we can say, that's not how we recall things, and we can have him tell a different tale. So before your adventure even starts, Captain Lastry, who will become a potential companion later on, asks you to grab the ship's passenger manifesto and account for your buddies. That's right, you create your own party of 4 however you wish.
No way!
Yes way. The prospect of rolling it Icewind Dale II style? Hell yeah, sign me up. You can also give a name to your band of adventurers, and you can type in your own biography for role-playing purposes. Not bad, Storm of Zehir. Not bad at all. Guess what happens then? A storm wrecks your ship.
No way!
Yes way. Yes, this is one of the biggest cliches in video games, but we're going to let that one slide because we're arbitrary like that. But of course, no surprise again, you survive, and you're immediately greeted by the colorful local Batiri goblins. Volo tries to parley with them, and his attempt at a peaceful resolution lasts just enough for you to search the shipwreck for things with which to improvise weapons, bandages, and other items. And this is how the game introduces another of its nice little original ideas. This may not be anything to oh boy and oh wow about, but being the choice addict that I am, I loved it. This is how it works. Every time you interact with a character or an object, you get to see your party members' portraits, and you may choose which of them you want to perform the action. A little icon will display on the portrait of those characters who have unique dialogue options or actions. For example, if you click on your ship's sails, if one of your characters has high heal skill, he or she will get the option to fashion a bandage with the sail. Also in conversations, if one of your characters has high diplomacy or lore, he or she might extract more information from the NPC you're talking to, and maybe even circumvent the fight. And I love it! In Icewind Dale II, if you spread skills mastery around amongst all your party members, each of them becomes a valuable member of your band of adventurers, someone who's capable of unique and extremely useful things. It even gives you something to chew on role-playing wise. I felt like this aspect of the game was somewhat neglected in Neverwinter Nights 2, or at least implemented in a way that didn't feel as fun or useful. I think that Storm of Zehir brought back the importance of classes and skills in non-combat situations in the cleverest way. I couldn't help but think that this would have come in very handy in the core game. Unfortunately, and get used to this word if you want to continue watching this review, while this adds a decent amount of flavor to your Storm of Zehir platter, it very rarely has any significant impact. In video games, when scripted voiced companions join your party and tag along for the ride, if they are well written and interesting as they are in Mask of the Betrayer, they end up playing a big part in your adventure, and you even end up taking into account their feelings, their needs, and their expectations when you make decisions. The downside is that they may not always be what you want or need them to be gameplay-wise. Games like Icewind Dale and Icewind Dale II represent the other side of this coin. You create your own party of adventurers with your desired combinations of classes, races, and alignments, and spread skills around however you wish. The downside of this approach is in turn that, well, your companions won't have anything to add lore-wise, and they may end up feeling a little bit generic. Storm of Zehir came up with an interesting idea to tackle this dilemma, in theory at least. You create your party of 4 when you fill the passenger manifest on the boat, but there are several other companions willing to join your party throughout your adventure. If your party leader has the leadership feat, you can have up to 6 party members. So you can go, for example, with your 4 original gangsters and then recruit 2 additional companions. Unfortunately, none of them are even in the vicinity of companions like Ganayev or Oku when it comes to their backgrounds, personalities, or motivations. While the adventurers who are willing to join your party in Storm of Zehir are voiced and they have their own backgrounds and a few somewhat interesting personality quirks, lore-wise, they have almost nothing to add. The reasons for joining up with you are generic as they come, and it's disappointing how rarely they have anything unique to say in dialogues. Lastri is probably one of the best of the lot, but not by much really. So while in theory, this blend of custom-made characters and companions is a really good idea, your companions are so generic and one-sided that they are just
all not worthy.
So after walking about for a while in Summergall, which is the initial location in the game, getting to know who's who and what's what, and picking up your first quests, you run into the next nice surprise. The map is not your typical display of locations that you highlight and click on if you want to travel to any of them, with the occasional ambush that interrupts your journey. This time you actually get to navigate the map, and this is pretty freaking awesome at first. Your party appears in the map as a minified version of the character you have currently selected. As you travel to your destination, new locations, treasures, and landmarks will appear on your map. Some of them are places that you can get into and explore further. Some others are just resources that you can collect, and yet some others are monsters that you have to fight. If the character that you have selected has high spot and search skills, more locations and treasures will appear, and you will be able to spot enemies from farther away. If you're close to a group of monsters and you're not interested in fighting them, you might want to select a character with high move silently and hide skills to simply sneak by them. You can even come by unique boss characters that you may get a bounty for. This works really well in combination with the trade in the game. That's right, later on there's trade to be done in this game. And while Storm of Zehir didn't exploit this idea to the fullest, it's a nice little concept that's both fun and useful. Not only can you make money with trading, but there are also trade-related quests, some of which are pretty cool. This feature of the game even reminded me of the map in Mount & Blade. You can see your caravans going from place to place, and they are even attacked by monsters and bandits from time to time. And if you're around, you may even step in and try to save them. There's also interesting combat in Storm of Zehir, even if there are not as many challenging, cool boss fights or high-stake encounters as there were in Mask of the Betrayer. Questing is fetch questy for the most part, but it involves navigating the map, and that almost always adds a feeling of adventure that might help us forgive the generic quality of the quest. Unfortunately, that can only go so far. My main gripe with Storm of Zehir is that the story is not strong enough to bundle together the many aspects of its gameplay. From the get-go, it is obvious that Storm of Zehir does not take itself as seriously as Mask of the Betrayer at all. For the most part, it feels like a light-hearted adventure in which the story takes the backseat in favor of exploration and trade. And that sounds like a viable enough concept, and it works for a while. One problem is that quests aren't interesting for the most part, and while braving the forest as you take care to avoid these roaming bands of monsters and spending the night in caves can make quests about finding an amulet for some random guy in a tavern interesting, it gets old sooner rather than later. For a brief moment though, Storm of Zehir goes full Baldur's Gate 2 or Mask of the Betrayer on you. It all starts with this quest in which this goody-doer merchant asks you to liberate the town of Portlast from Luskan invaders, who are also planning to turn it into a bastion from which to launch a full-scale invasion to take over the entire region. When you arrive to Portlast, you can see the martial law in effect. Soldiers are patrolling the streets, and people are visibly scared and resentful of the Luskans. Here's where it gets interesting. You can straight out murder the Luskan leader of the garrison, Rin Shepherdeed, and go full commando on all the Luskan forces in town and rescue its former leader in the process, or you can talk to them to see what's what in Portlast. If you do this, the Luskans will reveal that there's a couple of major issues that need to be dealt with. First, there's undead creatures that have been attacking the town lately, and you must find out why this is happening and put an end to this. And second, there's a perpetual storm that has seriously crippled trade and has all but brought the Luskan invasion to a halt. You can deal with both of these problems in various ways. You can go to the nearby Temple of Umberlee and brave its tests and challenges Indiana Jones style, and talk to the Umberlee priestess there. You can either have her end the storm, thus helping the Luskans, or you can ask her to wreck the Luskan ship docked at Portlast. If you bump to gums with the innkeeper at Portlast before going to the Temple of Umberlee, he might have told you that there's a contingent of soldiers stationed inside the Luskan ship. This will give you a different perspective on sinking the ship and give you further motivation to do it. Sinking the ship means that you will have to fight fewer soldiers if you decide to drive the Luskans out of Portlast. If you go to the cemetery, you will meet a necromancer called Nia. She's a patriot in her own way. Turns out that she is the one who has been summoning the undead creatures who have been attacking Portlast, and she has done so hoping to destabilize the Luskan and losing their grip on the city.
Not a great plan.
You can convince her to stop summoning creatures and leave. You can kill her, or you can join her and help her summon an even greater skeletal army. If you talk to Eomar at the inn, he might have given you a little tip about an ancient Portlast noble. Turns out that the guy's name is Lord Adrium, and if you have the right skills, you can convince him to raise an army of skellies with which you can invade Portlast and flush the Luskans out. And that is pretty badass if you ask me. If you had decided to kill the Luskans during your first meeting with their leader and free the former governor, he would have still asked you to solve both of these problems, but you probably would have wanted to convince the Umberlee priestess to end the storm, rather than sink the ship, and you would have probably just convinced Nia to stop summoning undeads and go home. You could have also recruited the help of Septimund, a man who was having an argument with the leader of the Luskan garrison over the undead invasion. See, this is how the entire game should have been if you ask me. Gravitas, high stakes, plenty of choices, a nice blend of puzzles, combat, and questing. Unfortunately, there isn't anything else quite like this in the rest of the game. The problem with Storm of Zehir is that neither its best moments nor its worst seem to amount to much for your party of adventurers. Not much seems to happen as a consequence of your actions. Story-wise, you're a glorified errand boy. I mean, you don't always have to be the son of Baal, or the vessel of a terrifying entity capable of devouring the souls of gods. But take for example Icewind Dale II. You're a band of adventurers coming from Luskan, not a chosen one, but the adventure unfolds as a consequence of your journey, and stakes are always a matter of life and death for many people. While you do play a somewhat important role in the story, I always felt like I could have gone back to Summergall, book a new ship, and then get the hell out of there. After all, none of what was happening was even my problem, and I certainly didn't owe anything to Sasani, especially not after all the work I did for her. And it probably would have been for the better, at least before the final stretch of the game, which ends in an abrupt and unsatisfying way, even after its epic boss encounter. In games like Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Mask of the Betrayer, heck, even in Neverwinter Nights 2, the main story is your story, or at the very least, it's one that you're in neck deep and can't simply walk away from. You do have to give credit to the developers though. Despite the fact that they threw in generous amounts of exploration, trading, crafting, and God knows what else, I always got the feeling that they knew what they were going for with this expansion, because it focuses so heavily on exploration, dungeons per se aren't too big. They almost never have more than one floor, and they rarely have more than 2 or 3 areas. The game is more about finding these places than braving them to the end Icewind Dale style. Unlike the story in Mask of the Betrayer, which demands your complete and undivided attention, what passes for a story in Storm of Zehir might have not been mediocre and bland on purpose, but it was definitely kept deliberately simple because you're only very occasionally going to devote time to its main quest, with all the exploration, trading, and side quests that the game has you doing all the time. If the story had been anything like the story in Mask of the Betrayer, one of 2 things would have happened. I would have either said, ah, fuck this shit, and I would have passed on all the exploration and trading that the devs worked so hard to put together in order to focus on the story. Or, I would have explored every inch of the map, found every treasure, established trading posts in every town and settlement, and when I felt it was time to go back to the main quest, I would have constantly been asking questions like, who the fuck are you again? What the hell are you talking about? What the fuck am I supposed to do next? Instead, the gameplay elements in Storm of Zehir were prioritized accordingly. Now, whether or not these decisions hit the right spot for you, that's a whole different story. I particularly wasn't crazy about them, and I can very much put my finger on what didn't work for me. Storm of Zehir is a mix of individually good ideas that don't quite mesh together into a solid whole, and that's because the story fails in its aspiration of serving as an interesting canvas for your journey. There are times in which Storm of Zehir is firing on all cylinders, and when that happens, the fun factor is off the roof, but good quests and a decent story are the fuel when it comes to classic RPGs. And unfortunately, this one runs out of gas several times during its overly lengthy runtime. Neverwinter Nights 2 is not a top-tier D&D game in my opinion, but I was never bored with it. I can genuinely rate my fun with the core game somewhere between 7 when it was at its worst, and 9 when it was at its best. Though the final stretch might be a 6, but let's not get into that discussion. Mask of the Betrayer, on the other hand, may be an 8.8 if we factor in all the problems it inherits from Neverwinter Nights 2, but a freaking 10 out of 10 if we consider its jaw-dropping story, its impactful choices, and challenging combat. Storm of Zehir puts a smile on my face on numerous occasions during the time I spent with it, but it also bored me to tears at times, and its abrupt end just broke my heart, before Volo could mend it with his recapping of my exploits. There are some marvelous ideas in this one. You can create your party from the get-go, but also recruit companions who hunger for adventure, who have backgrounds and personalities. Your companions have action and dialogue choices that depend on their classes and skills. You can always switch to the one that's best suited for the situation at hand. You can navigate the map and discover places and things and go back to Volo and tell him about them. He even rewards you for this. Heck, you even have an input in Volo's recreation of events that serves as an epilogue for the game. There's survival, trade, and adventure to be had in Storm of Zehir. Hell, even that brilliant moment we talked about, which is comparable to some of the best you've seen in some of the best games we've reviewed in our Road to Baldur's Gate 3 series. Unfortunately, told you I was going to use this word a lot, the lace that ties all of this together does a poor job at keeping the pack tight, cohesive, interesting, and ultimately translate into an at least partially wasted opportunity. If Neverwinter Nights 2 had a heart, Storm of Zehir has too. Krogan style. I would say there's even a special place in my heart for it, for the reasons Never Knows Best mentioned in his video. But it's much too long, and no amount of innovation can make up for a mediocre story, bland companions, and average core gameplay. If you already have Neverwinter Nights 2, and especially if you have already played it, giving Storm of Zehir a shot is a no-brainer. I don't think you're going to be able to resist the temptation after you're done with Mask of the Betrayer. I know I didn't. It'll likely be a one-and-done deal though, but man, I think it's ultimately one that you shouldn't miss. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you're seeing in this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Share the video, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.